My name is John Campbell. I am one half of Triangular Pixels. We are a games company, game studio in Cornwall, UK. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about social VR experiences in terms of what's available on the market now and the kind of things that we've had experience with. So we've made a few kind of commercial products right now. Summer Sandpit was an experiment in seeing if we could use VR to regress you to a childlike state. That was just a single player thing. Double Destruction was an asymmetric multiplayer experience using the Gear VR connecting to a tablet. Unseen Diplomacy is primarily a single player experience using non-Euclidean geometry. It's also designed for installations and deliberately designed for people to put on a performance for the spectators and have social interactions generated from that. And then our current project, Smash It Plunder, is a game that's both single player and multiplayer, and in both of those we have asymmetrical multiplayer components. So I'm going to present some of the lessons we've learned making these today. Now, VR has been classed as antisocial. Reggie Fils-Aimé of Nintendo dismissed VR games as antisocial and not for them. But there's lots of ways that we can make VR more social that's maybe not immediately obvious. So these are the kind of topics I'm going to come through very quickly. All of these require different design approaches and different approaches to getting the most out of different devices and hardware capabilities. So let's start with spectating players. So we all remember back in the old DK1 days when people were just starting to get their hands on kind of home consumer VR. And the main thing that was happening was people were sharing reactions of each other, usually on roller coasters, falling over, on the internet, on YouTube and so on. This is an important social interaction. Again, it's a shared experience, particularly when you're anticipating somebody seeing something and then you're experiencing and you have a connection there. So when we made Unseen Diplomacy, we designed this kind of performance, this spectacle into the game. This chap here is crawling underneath a laser grid to reach the switch to escape the room he's trapped in. And then even just people watching will kind of shout encouragement, and getting people to use their whole bodies in VR is much more engaging. Now, for spectating players, usually you have just the feed from the head on a monitor or whatever. Now, that kind of works, but it lets people see what's going on, but it can often be less than ideal. Like, it's quite nauseous. The camera is uncontrolled because people move their heads incredibly fast. And it's also, it's just not a good thing to be showing to other people. So here we have, on the side, we have an extra camera, and by smoothing the rotation and the position of that, we make it more friendly to be seen on a big TV. The reticule here is the raw track position, so you kind of get kind of fake kind of eye tracking, so you can see what they're focusing on without the kind of additional uncontrolled camera element. And we also want to give players room and space to make their own story. So with lasers, for instance, there are multiple ways of navigating that puzzle and navigating that environment. Some players block the lasers with objects they find. Some people will just crawl and move between them. One person found a broom and used the broom to poke between the lasers to progress. And these are things people are going to take away and share them afterwards, or even when they're watching somebody else play. When we're building games, we want to be thinking about how we can design these interactions in to encourage them. So, VR to social media. This is not one of our games. This is Painty. It's a game available on Steam right now in early access. Doing some very interesting things about VR players streaming what they're doing out to social media. Now, we all kind of know about Twitch and the big following that has about gamers. In this, he has built-in Twitch integration with a virtual camera, which he can position, so he can put it and, again, put on performance for his viewers. And then people who are viewing via Twitch appear with these kind of floating TVs. Now, that makes them more engaged, and for the person putting on a performance, they don't feel like they're performing to a void. They can see their audience and how it grows and wanes as they're going on. Multiplayer HD to HD. So this is kind of a more elaborate option. Now, even though we've got these new devices, it's very easy to forget that all the old capabilities of devices still exist. So multiple times I've talked to people and they've forgotten that there's still a full-blown PC with networking and everything you can do there. So here in Scene Diplomacy, when we had it installed in the NVA, we had the Vive with the player in the background. We also had a separate PC with DK2 connected, so they were in the same social space, and they could help them out with the puzzles as they went through. Here we see a shot of what actually is going on there. There's the VR player with their disembodied head, but then the DK2 player, because they're kind of fixed in place, we position them as this security camera, and we mapped the position tracker of the DK2 through to the security camera. And what's interesting is, even though that's obviously not a humanoid avatar, people react to it. People see it moving, and they'll go up and prod it. And then when it reacts and the person pulls their face back, they suddenly realize it's not just an AI, it's a human in there. And you kind of get a rapport between the two. Also in HMD to HMD, a couple of other big games you should be checking out. Hover Junkers, Pool Nation, Alt Space, and Rec Room, all available in some form now. Hover Junkers is interesting because it's a traditional FPS game, so it's designed to be, the game comes first. It's not a place for hanging around, which means it doesn't really have meeting spaces and so on. But what it does have is some very, very well-tracked avatars. Of course, this is running on Vive, so you have 3 tracked points. So reconstructing the rest of the skeleton from those 3 points is never going to be completely accurate. So what they have on this is just showing the avatar for when you see other people. If you look down, you'll just see floating hands. You don't see your own body, because trying to position that correctly is error-prone. And I think, as mentioned previously, if your body is slightly off, that feels worse than not having it at all. Pool Nation, also a good one to check out. Again, very game-based, but it also allows lots of social interactions because it allows the kind of horseplay in the kind of barroom setup. It's also interesting to see how it enforces the rules of its games with kind of not necessarily real-world metaphors. So you can see on the pool table, there's kind of this glass wall that appears when it's not your go, which very clearly communicates the state of the game, but still make it feel like an actual game pool. Alt Space is a very kind of traditional attempt at doing like a social space. One of the problems it suffers from is because it supports almost every single type of consumer HMD now, from cardboard all the way up to Vives and Oculus. It has a very different range of hardware capabilities. As a result, its avatars tend to be quite static, quite dry, don't really react in the way you kind of expect them to. So probably a good thing to check out if you want to see how not to do an avatar. In contrast to this, you've got Rec Room. Now, Rec Room is a very similar concept, and it's just a social mess-around place. But because it's much lighter in tone, and it encourages people to express themselves, it has an art style to match. You can see here, customizing your avatar is literally taking a beard and putting it on your face. It's very immediate, it's very satisfying to pull that off. Here's our avatar from Smash It Plunder that we're demonstrating. Again, 3 tracked points. You've got heads and 2 hands. And it's important for us to not have the avatar glitch out. For traditional IK, often a particular problem point is the elbows. The elbow is sitting between your hand and your head with several very complicated joints in between. It's very hard to kind of guess with IK exactly where it is. So for us, we dodge this, we hide it in our art style, and we just don't display elbows. But along the same way, because we don't want to see things snapping and popping all the time, we instead use a two-bone IK method. Now, people aren't immediately aware that when you go to IK, if you restrict it to 2 bones, there is always an analytical solution. So it never snaps, it never pops, it's always smooth and continuous. So effectively, our avatar is created from a series of recursive 2-bone IKs, which means you get this lovely smooth movement. It may not 100% match up to what you're physically doing, but it always looks consistent and believable, and that's what's important for us. Of course, when you get into online play, you're going to get into all the usual trolling and griefing problems. But some of these are made much worse when you make them in VR, because now you can basically virtually grope people. That's not fun for anybody. So usual moderation tools are going to be even more important than in a traditional flat game. In particular, the concept of personal space needs to be recognized by whatever you're building. Possibly with some sort of built-in method of users allowing consent for other players to be either within their personal space or even to exist in their world at all. It's a lovely illustration from Peloton World that some things can be automatic. Giving consent virtually doesn't have to be some tedious flat UI. It could just be a bubble that exists around your player, and if you put your hand into somebody else's bubble, it just disappears. Social screen. So what do I mean by social screen? Social screen is what we refer to as the primary monitor or TV that the VR device is connected to. So obviously mobile devices, mobile HMDs don't have this, but a lot of the big high-end ones like Vive, Rift, and PSVR are going to have this. As I mentioned, the traditional output is not great. It's queasy, it's nauseous. So we put smoothing on it to fix that. It also tends to be poor quality. Because it is an eye texture, unwarped and redisplayed, you're getting that double warping, which is adding all sorts of fuzz to your actual output. The image quality suffers as a result. So by adding a third camera, doing the smoothing and processing that I talked about before, you can get much higher image quality. This makes the spectating, the viewing, much more pleasurable experience when you've not got lots of image artifacts in your face. Of course, when you've got a third camera, there's nothing that says you still have to keep it in the same place as the player that's experiencing your game. In Smash Up Plunder, we have a social screen now that views the world you're moving through from an isometric perspective, which then allows us to add separate gameplay in an asymmetrical way with different controls and different affordances of the world. Again, related to the topics of performance, what we like to do when we've done shows and expos is bring the game into the real world. Because part of it is bringing the people into the virtual world, but if you can bleed the virtual world into the real world, then you get a nice synergy there, and it just enhances the whole experience. We had some lovely helpers at the NVA, because Unseen Diplomacy is a kind of spy infiltration game. They came fully dressed up, which is lovely. We also had this feedback form for spectators to essentially rate their friends on their performances. It's very jokey, it's not serious, so we asked people to compare them for what kind of work would you recommend Sadient for, like Double Agent, Coratops, Bait. And people get engaged by just the act of reading through this. So, as I mentioned, social screens give you another opportunity to bring people together and play together. PSVR is probably going to be pushing this quite hard because in a kind of a sofa, TV, lounge situation, it's much easier to get extra people engaged. And asymmetrical gameplay offers a whole load of good new gameplay that we can mess with. Nintendo Land on the Wii U is probably a really good example of the kind of things you could do when you have separate screens and outputs. So we want to start bringing some of that kind of things into VR. So here we have our avatar and our VR player, and the social screen has a separate avatar, and they can move around semi-independently of the world. It gives them presence, it gives them a connection to the world, and people really do associate themselves with what they're seeing, and inhabiting the same world gives that social connection again. And the final one I want to talk about is having a HMD on an external device. Now, this is what we did with double destruction. For a mobile HMD like the Gear VR, you don't have a social screen, but you can still connect other devices to it. So we had a tablet with a separate app game that would connect to it. Again, synchronize the data of the two worlds so you can see what's happening. And then it let you poke into the other person's world. You see them moving around, you can poke the environment, you can make things fall over, add light, use the light to guide them through the dungeon. This has additional constraints because you're running on mobile devices, so you haven't got a lot of bandwidth in particular, but also just not a lot of rendering grunts. So we had to design our situations and our levels accordingly to get the most out. It's also a good point that now we're on a different device, we could really play to those strengths. So things that wouldn't work in our normal single player, because they require touch or something like that, work very well when you get them on a touch device, a tablet, and we very much customize the actions they're doing. So for instance, moving the lantern around had physical sliders for you to change the strength of the light and the position. Another good example of this kind of thing, if you're interested, is the Google Expeditions, which allows a teacher to control a whole room of Google Cardboards with a single touch device. Lets the teacher take a class of students on a virtual tour. So in summary, there's lots of different devices out there, and if you're looking for social play, there's lots of opportunities, but you kind of have to design very specifically the device that you're targeting. There's no one-fits-all solution. Pretty much all your wired HMDs have a social screen, and if you don't do something with it, then you're missing out on a lot of potential easy wins. Even just putting a third camera and putting something slightly decorated on it is a huge win over having that ugly, distorted third eye. And also, let people express themselves. When you give them avatars and you put them in that world, people love to inhabit that and puppeteer with that and show off. And if you can build your world and your avatars to let them more ways they can express themselves, then the better the overall experience is going to feel. Thank you very much.